Cahokia Mounds, ancient metropolis. Emerging from the mist of centuries, they stand as sentinels of the past, of a lost civilization. But 1,000 years ago, these mounds stood at the heart of a great city, one which was, at its time, the most powerful city in America. Today we call it Cahokia. Located just across the Mississippi River from present-day St. Louis, this was the metropolis of ancient America, the largest city in the United States before it was the United States. While Europe was mired in the Dark Ages, the people of the Mississippian culture were making rapid cultural and scientific advancements. Cahokia was a city of thousands of people, but it also was a city of grand monuments. This civilization created some of the largest earthworks in the ancient world. Their trade networks extended over much of the continent. It was a center of art, commerce, power, and wealth. But who were these people? They obviously had an advanced society, organized on a massive scale, and capable of both immense engineering works and refined artistic expression. The fate of this great city and its occupants is not clear, but the legacy they have left behind is an intriguing and fascinating look into the past. William Eisenmenger has been studying Cahokia for more than 2 decades. 2 of the greatest cities of the Midwest are separated only by a few miles and 1,000 years of time.
It never ceases to sort of give me an unusual feeling every time I climb to the top of Monk's Mound and think about what might have been here. I have no doubt that Cahokia was the most unique Indian settlement that ever existed here on the North American continent, north of Mexico at least.
How did Cahokia emerge as this ancient metropolis? Where did these people come from? To find out, we have to travel back into time. Back to when much of North America was locked in the frigid grip of the Ice Age. The precise origin of Native Americans eludes us. Scientific evidence indicates that the first humans came to the North American continent from northern Asia, sometime during the last Ice Age, possibly 12 to 20,000 years ago. So much of the Earth's water was locked up in huge continental ice sheets that sea levels were lowered between 250 and 400 feet. Lower sea levels exposed a landmass, the Bering Land Bridge, connecting Siberia with Alaska. Hunters followed herds of migrating caribou, mammoths, and other animals across the bridge and into North America. By 12,000 years ago, the last of the great continental glaciers had receded. Descendants of these emigrants had spread across both North and South America. After many generations, these peoples had become natives of a land that had never seen humans before. They became Native Americans. They were gatherers and hunters, living off whatever the land could provide. We know that they actively hunted such giants as the Ice Age caribou, the mammoth, and the mastodon, possibly even to extinction. As the climate of North America gradually warmed, distinct Indian cultures were slowly emerging. Many Indian cultures have left little more than footprints behind, but one culture was to leave a dramatic and unique mark on the land. Around 1000 BC, a people we call the woodland culture was developing throughout most of eastern North America, appearing near Cahokia around 600 BC. Over a period of 1,400 years, these people developed agriculture and became increasingly tied to the land. Populations increased, technical advancements flourished, and social life, ceremonies, and rituals became more elaborate. Mounds are the most obvious signature of the woodland people, but mounds take many forms. Most were conical burial mounds, some steep-sided and up to 50 feet high. As well, these ancient engineers built long ridge-top mounds, earthen embankments, moat-like trenches, and magnificent geometric earthworks. But there's more. After the year 500, effigy mounds in the shape of animals were also constructed. The fundamental question remains: why build mounds? Most effigy mounds could only be fully seen and appreciated from the air. One, the Great Serpent Mound in Ohio, takes the form of a huge snake almost a quarter-mile long. In almost all cases, the mound builders were very precise and detailed in their work, creating complex monuments and large-scale replicas of animal forms. In fact, mound building would become an obsession in eastern North America for centuries to come. Construction took place in river valleys, on bluffs, and in some cases, fortress-like earthen walls enclosed hilltops. Perhaps for defensive purposes, perhaps for ceremony. We simply don't know. But we do know that by far the largest and most impressive earthworks were built here at Cahokia, in a setting which was, in many respects, ideal. Cahokia is near the confluence of the Mississippi, Missouri, and Illinois rivers. It is in the center of an expansive and fertile floodplain, today known as the American Bottom. The rivers, lakes, sloughs, and marshes provided habitats for many species of fish, waterfowl, and aquatic plants. These extensive waterways were actually highways, giving access to distant hunting grounds. The rivers were also trade routes, where goods were exchanged, and ideas flowed as steadily as the waters. The forested Ozark Mountains to the southwest offered important minerals and rocks, like chert for making tools. The prairie to the north provided a seemingly endless expanse of tall grasses, useful for thatching homes and other structures. The woodlands were rich in nuts and berries, and in animal life: turkey, squirrel, and deer. The forests also provided oak, hickory, and other hardwoods for canoes, bowls, bows and arrows, building materials, and of course, fires. And the Mississippi Valley itself gave the Indian peoples not only its incredibly rich soil, but also fish, ducks, geese, and other migratory waterfowl. By 800, the Mayans had declined in Central America, and Europe was in the midst of the Dark Ages. But in the heartland of North America, conditions were now right for the flowering of a great civilization. Out of the woodland culture, another more highly advanced people were to emerge, the Mississippians, and Cahokia was their crowning achievement. For several hundred years, it was the major center of a culture that spread across central and southeastern North America. It was during this Mississippian period that Cahokia developed, prospered, and eventually declined. Today, we build monuments to our civilization, such as skyscrapers and the St. Louis Gateway Arch. But 1,000 years ago, the ancient Mississippians were also building monuments, not of glass and steel, but of earth. The most dramatic monuments of Cahokia are those that survive today, the mounds. Investigations suggest that the placement of the mounds is not random. Dr. Melvin Fowler.
Well, sometimes people get the impression from that this was just something that grew up just by accident, but it appears that there was much more careful planning than that. The idea of the central community with the great plaza with the biggest mound at the site was planned real early on, and then the growth of some of these sub-communities around was a little later, but I think once again their locations and their relationships to the central plaza were also very, very carefully thought out.
From 900 to 1400, the Cahokians constructed more than 120 earthen mounds, moving over 55 million cubic feet of earth. They built 3 types of mounds. The most common were the rectangular platform mounds, whose flat top served as a base for ceremonial buildings and residences of the powerful. 2 other mound types are also found at Cahokia: conical and ridgetop mounds. These were apparently used for the burials of important people and as markers of significant locations. Nearly all of the mounds excavated at Cahokia were built in stages, appearing to have been enlarged or modified over time. Quite often, structures were erected on top of platform mounds. Archaeological excavations suggest that these buildings were temples, dwellings of the elite, council lodges, and charnel houses used in burial ceremonies. Piercing Cahokia's horizon is Monk's Mound. As high as a 10-story building, it is easily the most massive work of the mound builders and is prehistory's equivalent of a skyscraper. Situated in the middle of the city, this is the largest prehistoric earthen structure in the Western Hemisphere. Cahokia's leader conducted ceremonies and governed the city from atop this massive man-made mountain. A platform mound, it covers over 14 acres and rises in 4 terraces to a height of 100 feet. Atop it was constructed an impressive structure, 105 feet long, 48 feet wide, and perhaps 50 feet high. Monk's Mound was enlarged several times over a period of 300 years, from 900 to 1200, then modified slightly over the next 100 years. 22 million cubic feet, perhaps 15 million basketfuls of earth were moved to create this mound, all of it dug with stone tools and carried in baskets on workers' backs. This immense effort would take the equivalent of 100 men laboring 50 years non-stop to build Monk's Mound. Mound construction is not simply the process of piling up earth. Cahokia's ancient engineers used soil of varying textures to build different parts of the mound in order to provide proper drainage and structural integrity. Platform mounds that may have held charnel houses were sometimes paired with conical burial mounds. The 6 known ridgetop mounds at Cahokia are especially intriguing because their full purpose is unknown. 3 are known to contain burials. They also vary greatly in size. Rattlesnake Mound is the largest ridgetop, measuring nearly 500 feet in length. Powell Mound was the second largest, before its destruction by farmers in 1931 for fill dirt. Unfortunately, a combination of natural erosion and modern farming activities has diminished the size and changed the shape of many mounds, in some cases rendering them unrecognizable as man-made structures. Many have been completely lost to the bulldozer and the plow. Today, fewer than 80 mounds remain at Cahokia. The building of these mounds consumed vast quantities of time, energy, and materials. The huge amounts of earth removed for their construction created depressions, today referred to as borrow pits. These filled with rain and groundwater and became swamps and ponds. Some may have even been used as fish farms. Cahokia was a true city, and buildings covered its landscape. By far the most common buildings at Cahokia were single-family dwellings. These homes had special areas for making tools, preparing food, storage, and sleeping. The Cahokians erected a large number of structures for communal purposes. These included council lodges and open-air summer houses, both used for neighborhood meetings, elevated granaries and other food storage buildings, and sauna-like sweat lodges where people, mostly men, went to purify their bodies and spirits. The most impressive buildings at Cahokia were the temples of religion and government. The 5,000 square foot home of the great chief atop Monk's Mound was large even by today's standards. The Mississippians were accomplished and prolific builders. Among their most intriguing works were the astronomical sun calendars, or woodhenges. Like England's Stonehenge, the American woodhenge served as a giant computer to keep track of the seasons, the solar equinoxes, and the solstices. Enormous cedar posts once served as markers, as points on the compass to track the movement of the sun and possibly the moon and stars. Recently, some archaeologists have also looked at woodhenge as an alignment device, used in determining the placement of certain mounds and other landmarks at Cahokia. Excavations have revealed at least 5 circles in roughly the same location, some with a center marker, each slightly larger than the last, and each with an additional 12 poles. Why the increasing number? Maybe the Cahokians were refining their calendar. The real answer remains a mystery. A fire pit was located near one winter solstice pole. Fires may have burned here to encourage the sun's return from the south to re-warm and rejuvenate the earth for another annual cycle. A ceramic vessel recovered at the solstice pole is decorated with symbols of the sun and may have been used during the solstice ceremonies. We now know that Cahokia was a fortified city. Surrounding the heart of this ancient metropolis was an impenetrable 2-mile-long stockade. The mysteries of Cahokia have been uncovered in many ways. Some clues to the puzzle were not visible on the ground. Early aerial photographs taken of fields near Monk's Mound in 1922 revealed light linear streaks that might have been soil disturbances from an ancient wall. Excavations confirmed what the photographs suggested. However, it was not just one wall, but a series of 4 enclosures built one after another over a 150-year period from 1100 to 1250. It was an extraordinary task. Each wall required 15,000 to 20,000 logs, 1 foot in diameter and 20 feet tall. The timbers may have been covered with clay to protect against fire and the elements. Undoubtedly, the wall created an impressive deterrent. To a degree, the wall may have served as a social barrier, separating the elite insiders, the privileged class, and the leaders from those on the outside, the commoners. However, 3 telltale indicators lead archaeologists to believe that it was primarily a defensive structure. The great height of the palisade, the presence of evenly spaced bastions from where archers could shoot arrows, and finally, portions of the wall were built through residential areas, as if danger were imminent. For those trying to piece together the past, this brings up several questions. Was Cahokia, this unrivaled metropolis, this center of wealth and power, in danger from outside forces? Were other Indian peoples also organized on such a massive scale as to present a real threat to this powerful city? The very presence of the stockade indicates this may have been the case. Dr. John Kelly.
But shortly after Cahokia's initial peak, around 1150, there is the construction of a stockade in East St. Louis. This development coincides with the construction of the stockade here at Cahokia, the initial construction. And we see a similar thing being done at Mitchell. Now, whether this is coming from the people in the immediate area or what they perceive as threats beyond the American bottom is something that archaeologists haven't been able to determine.
Outside the stockade, west of Monk's Mound, stood another walled enclosure, referred to as the compound. The purpose of the compound is, to this day, unknown. Scattered throughout Cahokia were plazas, open expanses of parched clay, trampled to the consistency of concrete. Like shopping malls in America today, ancient America's craftsmen may have set up shop here. And this is where the day-to-day exchange of information and ideas would have taken place. By far the largest of these town squares was to be found in front of Monk's Mound. The central plaza probably had open-air markets clustered on the edge, and a field where the favorite game of chunky was often played. Archaeologists also discovered that much of the plaza area was intentionally filled and leveled to form the large flat expanse. Perhaps the most impressive feature of Cahokia is that this huge ancient metropolis was built entirely by hand. There were no beasts of burden as in the Old World, and amazingly, no Indian civilization developed the wheel. But even more amazing is the organization and sheer manpower necessary to build Cahokia. Thousands upon thousands of trees had to be chopped down with stone axes and transported miles by laborers just to create the stockade. In 1150, with an estimated population of some 20,000 people, Cahokia was one of the great urban centers of the world. It was larger than London and most other European cities at the time. In fact, it would not be until the year 1800 before another American city, Philadelphia, would surpass Cahokia's record. The orderly layout of Cahokia suggests that this was a planned city, in the shape of a diamond, with Monk's Mound at its center. The city measured 3 miles east to west and over 2 miles north to south. In all, a little more than 5 square miles. It was, however, a very crowded city, much more crowded than practically any American city of today. But, as in modern cities, people lived in neighborhoods, and the basis of neighborhood and community organization was the family. Members of several generations probably lived in a cluster of single-family dwellings. These neighborhoods bustled with outdoor activity, children playing, women grinding corn, and all the comings and goings of daily life. The only quiet time was in the dead of winter, when they lived and worked mostly indoors, patiently awaiting spring's return. Cahokia, as a city, did not exist in complete isolation. It was part of a society which extended far beyond its urban boundaries. Just as in our own society, Cahokia had sizable suburbs, regional centers, and farming communities which helped support it.
Each one of these centers has its own unique history and how it related to Cahokia. Some of them, such as St. Louis, unfortunately was destroyed before archaeologists could carefully study it. So we know very little about it except for the maps that were made during the 19th century. Very early on at Cahokia's peak, which occurred probably around 1100 AD, we see a lot of settlements located very low on the floodplain. As we go through time, we find that these settlements move higher and higher up onto the floodplain locations, and then we see settlements disperse into the uplands after Cahokia's peak.
Other temple towns existed throughout Mississippian culture and were scattered over the Mississippi and Ohio River valleys and into the southeast. They boasted populations in the hundreds or possibly thousands. Usually, several mounds surrounded a plaza. Many of these communities also served as regional centers for trade and commerce. But throughout it all, there was only one Cahokia. This densely populated city was the great capital of politics, religion, commerce, and art. It was unique among all Mississippian communities. Were all of these communities linked, part of a grand prehistoric Indian nation with Cahokia as its capital? Or were they separate and independent, simply trading goods and ideas? There is no doubt that Cahokia was a cohesive, organized society. None of these grand monuments could have been built any other way. Nor could they have been built without well-tended fields, capable of feeding a population in the tens of thousands. Agriculture was the key to it all. To feed this population required massive amounts of corn on a daily basis. While they raised several varieties of corn, they also cultivated squash, pumpkins, sunflowers, and other plants. A typical meal at Cahokia most likely consisted of corn, served in a variety of ways, some meat, and a portion of vegetable stew made primarily of squash, nuts, and pumpkin, and seasoned with salt and herbs. Those of higher status probably had more meat in their diet. Ironically, their great success with corn had long-term negative effects. Enormous population growth, nurtured by stable corn crops, eventually led to the depletion of the soil, as well as other vital natural resources. And their nutritionally unbalanced diet, too high in carbohydrates, too low in protein, caused malnourishment and chronic illness. Contagious diseases became more common. Yet, despite its obvious disadvantages, Cahokia was undoubtedly a magnet in the same way as cities are today. There was an elaborate hierarchy here that gave life a rigid structure and direction. The supreme power of the chief emanated from a belief in his divine affiliation with the sun god and the resulting control he wielded over food surpluses. His priestly advisors were an elite class that directed community leaders and the heads of family clans to design and supervise agricultural and building projects. Commoners toiled in the fields and in the borrow pits and manufactured the goods needed to support the lifestyle of the ruling class and society at large. Status, gender, age, and kinship all determined each person's precise role in life. As in many cultures, men and women had distinctly different roles. Men made tools, hunted, and fished, while women carried out all domestic and child-rearing duties, cultivated crops, and made pottery and clothing. Those of higher status were probably less burdened. As important as the buildings, monuments, and artifacts that we see as defining a culture are the things we cannot see, their beliefs. Beliefs and symbols gave life meaning and purpose and explained the grand scheme of existence. Thomas Emerson.
Very typically, we think of archaeologists as studying arrowheads and bones and garbage and reconstructing the economic life of people. But with symbolism, we have the one chance to possibly get into the minds of prehistoric peoples.
The Mississippians recognized a natural order to the universe and attempted to live in harmony with it. Their world was one of opposing forces, dark and light, order and anarchy, good and evil.
One of the things that's very clear to us at Cahokia is that the upper classes are using the symbolism to manipulate the activities of the lower classes. One of the really highly unusual aspects of Cahokia symbolism is this extreme focus on fertility. Virtually all of the pottery decorations and the stone figurines that we have recovered are tied to the idea of agricultural fertility. This is very unusual in the eastern United States, where warfare is generally depicted in the symbolism.
The Cahokian belief in an afterlife moved them to bury their honored dead with elaborate ritual and the lavish trappings of the life they had led. The dramatic extent of this came to light in the excavation of a small, obscure mound, Mound 72. Just 6 feet high, this ridgetop mound was overlooked on many early maps of the area. But later archaeologists who plotted it were intrigued by its unique diagonal axis and position, unlike the usual east to west or north to south placement. After years of investigations, Mound 72 yielded tens of thousands of artifacts and the remains of 270 burials. Among the burials was an early leader, resting on a blanket of 20,000 shell beads. Around him were 6 attendants, and nearby caches of mica, rolled sheet copper, and more than 800 perfect chert projectile points. Nearby, a deep pit held the remains of 53 young women, arranged in 2 rows and buried 3 deep, perhaps the victims of sacrifice. Mounds were places where the Mississippians entombed people of high status. Most of the population at Cahokia were buried in cemeteries, not mounds. Like many other ancient cultures, the full extent of Cahokian beliefs remains a mystery. They had no written language or records, and our knowledge of them is acquired in bits and pieces. We assume that Cahokians enjoyed music, song, and dance, and based on observations of historic tribes, they regularly engaged in games of chance and skill. Music was created through the use of rattles, drums, and flute-like instruments or whistles. Dancing was probably symbolic. For instance, a weaving line of people mimicking a snake in a fertility ritual. They played shell-guessing games and gambled with dice. Like Native Americans in the Southeast, they may have also played a stick and ball game similar to lacrosse. But the premier sport at Cahokia was chunky. In a way, it was their national pastime. Players threw javelins at a rolling concave stone, attempting to mark the place where it would come to a stop. Chunky engaged the entire community, From its youngest members, who apparently played with miniature chunky stones, to its leaders, who were buried with the puck-like objects. Betting on the game was common, and matches may have continued throughout the day. Apparently, tattooing and body painting were used by both Mississippian men and women to enhance beauty and indicate social standing. The tangible signs of wealth and power can also be seen in the great number of artifacts not native to this area. Following established trade routes, Cahokians either traveled by foot or canoed vast distances in all directions, acquiring such things as copper from the upper Great Lakes, mica from the southern Appalachians, and seashells from both the Gulf of Mexico and the Atlantic seaboard. Well-crafted tools and food surpluses were traded for other highly prized raw materials. Copper from the north was shaped into implements, but most often hammered into sheets from which effigies and ornaments were cut. Through their extensive trade networks, the Cahokians imported tens of thousands of exotic marine shells used for ornamentation, including the whelk, conch, and marginella. Galena, ochre, and hematite from southeastern Missouri were ground into paint pigments. Quartz and fluorite from as far away as Tennessee were used for ornamentation and ceremonial projectile points. They cut beads and other objects of adornment from Appalachian mica. Ozark bauxite, fire clay, and numerous rocks and minerals were carved into animal and human effigies. Many items were manufactured for ritual purposes only and were buried with people of high status for use in the next world. Trade and ideas flowed during Cahokia's zenith. But despite striking similarities to cultures in Mexico and elsewhere, flat-top mounds, calendric systems, and ceramic styles, there is no evidence of direct contacts with any Mexican culture. Mississippians seem to have emerged into prominence on their own. Time and the elements have, for the most part, destroyed all traces of clothing, baskets, animal skins, and other fragile items. Yet miraculously, some of their extremely fine woven cloth has remained, preserved by copper salts or charred by fire. Fortunately, artifacts fashioned from stone, bone, shell, and pottery have survived the centuries, either whole or in fragments, and help to explain Mississippian life. Like sandpaper or a file, sandstone served as an abrasive. It was also used in the production of figurines and incised tablets, such as the Birdman tablet. But one tool changed their lives. Manufactured from chert, large hoes made corn cultivation efficient. And without efficient agriculture, Cahokia could not have developed. The most abundant artifacts found are the fragile remains of pottery, mostly made from local clays and formed through the coiling process. Over the years, Cahokian pottery became more refined and artistic. Ornaments, engraved beakers and bowls, and effigy figures all may have been used for special occasions. They also made large, thick-walled pans for salt production, and stumpware, whose tree stump-shaped legs were probably used to support pots over fires. For centuries, forests around Cahokia were sources for the tremendous quantities of wood essential to life here.
They would have to have wood every day for firewood for thousands of people for hundreds of years. Each house you build takes around 100 trees. The stockade wall that went around the center of the site here, almost 2 miles long, was built 4 times, and each construction took around 20,000 trees. So when you start adding all that up, you start realizing they were depleting the resources of the forests in the area.
Deforestation probably was a contributing factor to Cahokia's eventual demise. The Mississippians made full use of the animals they hunted. Turtle shells became bowls and combs. Feathers were used in necklaces, headdresses, and capes. Skins were used for clothing, bags, and blankets. By far the most important animal was the white-tailed deer. Besides being the major source of meat, antlers and bones were used for arrow points, tools, and ceremonial headdresses. The inner bark of the cedar tree was made into fine baskets and fabrics. Weavers spun animal hair and silky fibers from plants into thread, which they then finger wove into sashes and other fabrics. Rawhide, incredibly strong, was used to lash tools to handles and braided to make bowstrings. Cahokians had managed to build a true civilization based on corn and a simple digging tool, the hoe. They embroidered the civilization with art and a wealth of trade items. Yet even while they continued to build their earthen monuments, it was the beginning of the end. In the 1200s, at the same time the Crusades were ending in Europe, the decline and eventual abandonment of Cahokia began. To date, no sign of epidemic, invasion, or natural disaster has been uncovered. Why, then, did these people of unparalleled wealth and power move away? Strangely, Cahokia's very success is probably what led to its downfall.
The theories about the decline of Cahokia are variable. They range from such things as disease or social conflict, warfare with other groups. One of the most crucial ones, though, was the depletion of resources in the area. And just the need they had for wood alone was probably sort of staggering, I guess you'd say. When you start cutting down the forest, you're also cutting down the habitat of animals you hunt for food. You have to keep going further out to get these things that you need, and you're competing more than with other people for those same resources. So we see increased, conflict. And then sometime after 1200 AD, there were some climatic changes, and perhaps a shifting of the rainy season from the growing season. The people themselves may have not noticed these changes, but the plants react to these. And you start having shortages of food and resources, and you start having more social, internal conflict or problems, and perhaps the system is breaking down.
This huge city overexploited the natural resources around it. Because agriculture was so successful, it led to overpopulation, pollution, poor sanitation, and an increase in contagious diseases. A gradually cooling climate affected food production. Surpluses declined. Cahokia's political and economic control waned. Disillusioned and dwindling masses likely rebelled, but there is no clear evidence of warfare. This ancient metropolis simply faded away as its people slowly left. By the year 1400, it was all over. What became of these people is unknown. We can only guess at who their descendants might be. Today, Cahokia and its suburbs hold many mysteries, the subjects of scientific investigations to come. The ancient Mississippians built a nation long before the United States became a nation. They developed a civilization long before the arrival of European civilization. For centuries, Cahokia was the undisputed center of the Mississippian culture. But like the Mayans, Romans, and Egyptians before them, they eventually collapsed beneath the weight of their own society. What secrets did they take with them, these amazing people who carved a vibrant city out of a vast wilderness? To this day, only 1% of Cahokia has been excavated. What secrets will tomorrow reveal about this ancient metropolis, Cahokia? Much of what remains is preserved within the 2,200 acres of Cahokia Mounds State Historic Site. Located in Collinsville, Illinois, near St. Louis, Missouri, Cahokia was designated a World Heritage Site in 1982 by the United Nations. A comprehensive state-of-the-art interpretive center brings the Mississippian civilization to life for hundreds of thousands of visitors each year. Lecture series, craft classes, and archaeological field schools are ongoing programs at Cahokia. Nature hikes and seasonal guided tours allow visitors a first-hand look at Cahokia's past as seen today. Solstice and equinox sunrise observances at the reconstructed Woodhenge help bring this amazing discovery to life. Inside the center, visitors are invited to tour many fascinating exhibits, an award-winning multimedia presentation, and the museum shop, which stocks a large selection of books, art, and jewelry. Cahokia's largest annual festival is Heritage America, where in early fall, Native Americans and visitors join together to honor an ancient city and the accomplishments of its people. This is a unique place. Here stood the heart of a civilization and a truly great achievement, the ancient metropolis, Cahokia.